Welcome to the Quotive Corner. Today's quote is one of those observations that sounds almost casual until it finishes its sentence. And then it just sits there, doing something uncomfortable to your assumptions about what freedom actually means. A rat in a maze is free to go anywhere, as long as it stays inside the maze. That's Marget Atwood from Chapter 27 of The Handmaid's Tale, published in 1985. Atwood is one of the most important living writers in the English language. Canadian novelist, poet, and essayist whose work has spent 4 decades examining power, gender, identity, and the architecture of control. The Handmaid's Tale, which you almost certainly know either from the book or its television adaptation, is set in a near-future theocratic state called Gilead, where women have been stripped of their rights, their identities, and their autonomy, but are permitted to move within carefully defined boundaries. The quote appears in that context, almost as a throwaway observation, and it describes the condition of the handmaids with a precision that no direct statement could match. So, what is it actually doing? The quote is a paradox constructed to expose an illusion. The rat moves. The rat chooses directions. The rat experiences something that, from the inside, functions like freedom. It goes left, it goes right, it backtracks, it explores. Nothing is forcing it down a single corridor, and yet the entire experience of choice is occurring within a structure designed and controlled by someone else entirely. The rat's freedom is real at the level of individual decisions and completely fictitious at the level of the system those decisions operate within. Atwood isn't just describing Gilead, she's describing something that applies well beyond a fictional dystopia, and that's precisely what makes the line cut so cleanly outside the novel's context. Think about the varieties of maze that structure ordinary life. The workplace where you're free to choose how you spend your day as long as you meet the metrics someone else designed. The social media platform where you're free to say anything you want as long as the algorithm decides it's worth showing to anyone. The neighborhood, the tax bracket, the citizenship status, the body you were born into, all of these define a maze with invisible walls that most people spend their entire lives navigating without ever quite naming as a maze. The movement inside it feels like freedom. The structure around it is something else entirely. This is not an argument for despair or paralysis. Atwood isn't saying freedom is a complete illusion, and nothing you do matters. She's doing something more precise. She's distinguishing between freedom of movement and freedom of structure, between the liberty to choose among available options and the power to determine what the options are. Those are genuinely different things. And confusing one for the other is how people end up feeling free in conditions that are actually quite constrained. We discussed Solzhenitsyn's quote a few episodes back on the tension between freedom and equality, that pursuing one tends to constrain the other. Atwood is approaching a related but distinct question. What is the difference between apparent freedom and actual freedom? And more uncomfortably, how would you know if you were the rat? That last question is the sharpest edge in the quote, because the rat doesn't know it's in a maze. That's the whole design. The walls are far enough apart to allow genuine movement. The space is large enough that the boundaries don't press in on you constantly. And if you have never been outside the maze, if the maze is the only reality you've ever known, the concept of outside may not even register as a meaningful category. Montesquieu warned us that the greatest tyranny is the kind perpetrated under the shield of law and in the name of justice, the kind that arrives dressed as legitimacy. Atwood is identifying the psychological dimension of the same phenomenon. The greatest confinement is the kind that doesn't feel like confinement, the maze that looks like a landscape. There's a version of this that applies to individual psychology as well as social structure. We all carry internal mazes, the inherited beliefs, the unexamined assumptions, the emotional patterns developed in childhood that we navigate so automatically we mistake them for the nature of reality rather than structures built by experience. The person who always defers to authority, not because they've evaluated the authority, but because deference is the only map they have. The person who can't imagine a different kind of relationship because every relationship they've ever seen followed the same pattern. The person who stays within professional or creative boundaries, not because they have decided those boundaries are correct, but because they have never seriously questioned whether those are the actual walls or just the ones they inherited. This is where Lao Tzu's quiet observation connects, that the person who truly knows doesn't need to perform knowing. Part of what genuine self-knowledge produces is the ability to see your own maze, to recognize where your choices are actually free and where they're constrained by structures you didn't choose and haven't examined. That recognition doesn't automatically dissolve the walls, but it changes your relationship to them. You stop mistaking the maze for the world. But here's the honest counterpoint worth naming. Some mazes are reasonable. Laws, social norms, institutional structures, many of these exist because completely unconstrained freedom produces chaos that ultimately makes everyone less free. Atwood's observation isn't an argument for tearing down every structure. It's an argument for seeing them clearly, for knowing which walls you're choosing to live within and which ones you've simply never questioned. There's a difference between accepting a constraint because you've evaluated it and concluded it's reasonable, and accepting one because you've never noticed it's there. The first is a choice. The second is the rat. The question Atwood is leaving you with isn't an easy one. Where are you moving freely inside a structure you've never examined? And if you examined it, would you still call it freedom? Those aren't questions with easy answers, but they're worth asking regularly, because the maze doesn't announce itself. It just offers you directions to choose from and waits to see which ones you take. Thanks for being here at the Quotive Corner. If this episode made you look at something in your life, a structure, a pattern, a set of available options, with a little more scrutiny than usual, that's exactly what Atwood intended. And don't forget that wisdom isn't in the quote, it's in the reflection. I hope to see you again in the next episode.